Good morning. I'll talk about this ticket. Sending this to Charlotte. Marked as helpful and solved. Bam. That's a positive note to start on. Today, we're going to talk about what I say behind the scenes of some of Have I Been Pwned's most important architectural components. And we're going to talk about that because I couldn't think of anything else when I sat down to schedule it this morning. But it did tie into discussions I was having with Stefan. We're going to read through some of Stefan's messages this morning. Now that I've had, at this rate, my third coffee at 6:30 in the morning. That is 2.5 hours after getting up as well, so it's not that bad. I'm going to talk through some of his feedback last night because I sort of thought that I wasn't awake enough when I read it. And I hadn't had enough coffee, but I was looking at it, I was getting the gist, and I was like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. I hadn't thought about doing it that way. But I broadened it so that we can fill out an hour. I do have a hard stop in an hour. I broadened it so that we can just talk about a bunch of different architectural things, which I thought would be fun. And just as I was sitting down, pressing the Go Live button, we had something come through, had a ticket come through, which is sort of part of the whole architecture thing. It is an AI-related thing. You may have heard of AI recently. It seems to be dominating everything. Even this morning, chatting, Stefan and Scott Helm and I chatting. I think I can read this. No one's going to be upset about that. I won't actually share what the website is, but Scott was saying he'd done something, made 100% by Claude in about an hour. I genuinely did not ring a single bit of any of that code. Okay, typo. Did not write a single bit of any of that code, including the HTML, PHP, JS, CSS, and even the Nginx server config. And it's pretty wild. It is amazing how much stuff you can do now with the AI. And like I've said many times before, we're all sort of trying to figure out where's the useful stuff and where's the junk, because there's a lot of each. I say that just as I'm doom scrolling through my Twitter while I was waiting for the coffee, and you see this. You seen what the White House is posting lately? Holy. Anyway, let's not go down that rabbit hole. Back on the AI theme. So we have an AI bot to answer support tickets, and this is a really good example of where AI can be super, super useful if you tune it and train it right and you give it the right source material. So we get, let's say, a few dozen support tickets a day. And a lot of the time, they're like this one just here. So someone, this is 8 minutes ago, someone says, hi, we'll start with the subject here. Subject is quotation for HIBP and then the company name. Hi, I need a quotation for HIBP Enterprise, 500 users and steal the logs if necessary. We would like to see if you can show us the usability of the HIBP features when subscribed. Thank you, person's name. Now, everything this person is asking for is out there already. And in days gone by, we'd usually have like a macro or something. So we'd get this, it'd come in the middle of the night a lot of the time because we're asleep because Australia. You get up the next morning, you'd find the right macro, maybe that didn't completely answer the question, you do some manual stuff. I mean, let's say we burn 10 minutes or something on every ticket. Now we've got our Zendesk AI bot, which uses a combination of all of the knowledge base articles that we've put in Zendesk, and we have some specific AI training. And Charlotte's put a lot of work into the training to make it a bit Australian. It often says g'day. Make it a bit Australian, make it friendly, and to refer to all of the sources that we've got in the knowledge base articles, to refer to things like the terms and conditions. So it's index the external resource, which is the terms and conditions on Have I Been Pwned, and also some of the specific prompts. And 9 minutes ago now, this thing has come in, and this person has gotten the right answer. So the AI bot is like, hi there, thanks for reaching out with your questions. Pricing for Have I Been, I won't read the whole thing, but it explains exactly what they need and provides links through to the resources on the website. Now, 1 minute after this being sent to this person, Zendesk says the requester marked the AI agent's reply as helpful and the ticket was marked as solved. So they have got their answer straight away, while they're sitting there going, oh, I'd really like to get this Have I Been Pwned thing, but I don't know what, the answer to some of these questions. We have seen this ticket come in, so we still get an alert. But by the time we've clicked on it, because I've already marked it as helpful, it's already answered it, and they've got everything that they need. And that's cool. Like that's AI doing a good stuff. You know what I mean? And not just creating an image of someone with like 6 fingers and their teeth look weird. So, comments. G'day. Evil Cougar, Aaron, Neil, everyone. Jer is in Japan. I love Japan. Japan's so cool. VXD be real? Yeah. Am I ever on your feed when you doom scroll? Everything's on my feed when I do. It depends how much time I have, really. Marek says, I see future. All your Zendesk traffic is AI driven, both the queries received and the answers sent back. Aaron personally views AI bots as somewhat of a paywall, like you have to get through me until I can get some actual help from a human. It's very frustrating. But this is the eternal balance, right? Like, I don't like it when, okay, let's pick a more specific example. I don't like it when I call up a company and I have to go through the dumb IVR thing, and then I end up in a call center somewhere, someone that just sounds like they've got no idea what they're talking about. Like, that's a shitty experience. In the same way as if I just can't get through and get the right answer I want. And to be fair, it's not even so much that I desperately want to speak to a human or someone local or anything like that. I just want to find the answer that I want as fast as possible. And when the AI does the right thing, that's fantastic. But I guess our situation with the ticket is, if someone logs a ticket and they get an immediate reply, either it answers their question, and that's awesome, or it doesn't answer their question, and then we need to manually reply, which is what we had to do before we had the AI anyway. So it doesn't make anything any worse for anyone. And there is do we still have the AI bot on the, I don't know, but we've got the automatic reply. So only the first reply is from the AI. And at the moment, we're still reading them all as well. And we very often then just go back and add something to the AI's response as well, because maybe it hasn't quite captured everything they need. And we have to keep training it as well. And we're about to launch a bunch of new features, which I spoke about a few weeks ago. And then that's going to change a whole bunch of the training too. So we'll have to watch that fairly closely. Now, getting back to the topic here about some of the architectural stuff with Have I Been Pwned, one of the things that both Stefan and I are doing a lot of, and I feel he's probably doing a lot better than me, and he needs to teach me, but is using things like GitHub Copilot within Visual Studio. Now, I'll give you a couple of examples of where I've done this recently, and it's been both awesome and falls short. So the first one is, we have got an open source tool called Email Extractor. It's in the Have I Been Pwned repository on GitHub. And it is the tool that we use to pull all of the email addresses out of a dump of data. So very often the dump of data is multiple files that are usually .sql or .txt or .json or something like that. And this tool goes through and, as fast as possible, takes email addresses out, normalizes them so that they're lowercase, gets a distinct list, and then reports on the files that it found them in case we want to go and have a look at the files that had the most addresses in. And it does this just with known file types. We've got this allow list of the file types I mentioned before, such that the likes of PDF and docx, etc., would not be scanned. And I got a very, very large data breach a few days ago. And it had lots of plain text files, but with loads and loads of different weird extensions. So I went into GitHub Copilot. In fact, I'm looking at GitHub Copilot right now as I talk. And GitHub Copilot can run in 2 different modes. You can run in an ask mode, which is pretty much like just going into ChatGPT and asking questions, except it has the context of your code because you're there in the IDE and it can see everything you're talking about. And it will come back and it will make suggestions and it will give you code snippets. Or you can run in agent mode and it will do stuff for you. So everything's under source control. Go into agent mode and go, I would like to have a parameter on the email extractor. In fact, I'm going to drop this into the chat and then you can go and see, because it's all open source, you can see exactly what the output looks like. I went into Copilot and I said, I would like to have a parameter that allows us to scan every single file, regardless of whether it is a known file type or not. So let's go and have a look at this. It might have been that I can actually link you all the way through the latest PR and you can see the actual code it wrote. So it went through, it wrote all that code, and let's have a look. There's one commit here. So here's the PR. I'm going to drop that in here just in case anybody is interested in having a look at that. We have a look. It only changed 4 files, but it will go through each file that it needs. So now this is just a console app as well. So if it's only making changes to the CLI, there's no HTML or JS or CSS or any of the other funky stuff that we get when we're building a whole website. It can do all of that as well, of course, and I'll come back to that. But it's gone through, and it's just like I've eyeballed the code and gone, yep, it looks fine. Let's put the documentation in. I made one small human manual change to the documentation because I didn't like the way it was written. And that was it. And it worked straight away. And I got all of the files and things I needed. And that's just a really cool example of something which I could have done myself, but I might have burned an hour versus burned a minute. You know, like that's awesome. I was very, very happy with that. So I'm starting to push the boundaries on it a little bit more. We've got, we're doing some UX work at the moment with our UX designer, and he sent everything through as, what did he send it through as? What I can't remember because I just asked Copilot. I'm literally becoming more dumb writing code as a result of this. Anyway, he sent us through as a bunch of stuff that needed to be compiled, a bunch of Node stuff, and I just went into Copilot and I'm like, make this work in agent mode. And it compiled it, downloaded whatever NPM packages and so on it needed, automatically downloaded them, ran it, good to go. Where I found it fell short a little bit is some of the new features we're building for Have I Been Pwned. We end up with a combination of style sheets, TypeScript, HTML, all sorts of other things. And of course there's UX as well. And then they're like asynchronous postbacks because it's like a responsive, you know, single page app, this particular part of it. And it just didn't look nice. When it was done, it looked kind of shit. So I had to go through and manually do that. But then I found it really good for things like, because we're adding some new APIs, we've got a branch that's got all this API docs. And the API page, as it stands at the moment, it's got quite a bit of stuff in there. And I just went into Copilot and I'm like, tell me what looks inconsistent here. You know, have I consistently used the same nomenclature, the same formatting, the same styles in the right places? And it's like, you've missed this, this, this. And I was like, oh, okay. It's like they're not major things, but yeah, that's kind of cool. VX DBReal says Claude Code is extremely powerful. Yep. And when we're using Visual Studio here with GitHub Copilot, we can also choose the LLM that we want to use. So we have Claude Opus, we have Gemini, we have, Steph and I have been running GPT 5.4 at the moment. There's Claude Sonnet. There's, yeah, it's awesome. It's very, very cool. Having said that, I can see very easily how bad things can go wrong, like really, really fast. So I almost feel at the moment, if you're like someone really junior, like my son messaged me from school yesterday and he's like, yeah, Dad, I'm not going to study at school. He's year 11. I'm not going to study at school. After school, I need you to come pick me up because I need some help with code. And I was very proud. I was like, this is my time. You know? So, and then it all turned out to be Python, which is not my usual thing, but where I'm going with this is it's like, okay, he's using Visual Studio Code, which is what they use at school, which is cool. That's got a whole bunch of Copilot stuff built into it as well. I'm sort of looking at it going, if you are that age, not just learning to code, but at school, so you can't use AI, which is kind of weird, kind of understandable. But you're potentially looking at a career as a junior coder. I think that's hard because you don't, by definition, yet have the experience to be able to add the value to the AI that, say, Stefan and I can when we've been doing this for decades. So I think it's really, really valuable for people like us that have got the experience in the background, but we can just get so much of the monkey work done really, really quickly and then review it and go, okay, well, I can see where the gaps are here. So now getting back to Stefan. Let's talk a little bit about architecture with Have I Been Pwned, because it used to be really, really easy. It used to be there was a web application which ran on the Azure App Service, ASP.NET MVC, model view controller, classic pattern. There was a SQL Server backend, but it was very small, very minor part of the solution, and it basically just held the subscribers that signed up for notifications or domain monitoring. That was a good relational database thing to do. I could do it at a really, really small scale because it was an ancillary part of the service, and the primary repository was Azure Table Storage. And table storage was awesome, is still awesome for doing things at massive scale with very, very low latency, very high availability, and very, very low cost. And we ran that for years and years and years as the place where all of the email addresses for all of the data breaches went into. Right up until the point where we rolled to a relational database model a couple of years ago. So we now run a SQL Server hyperscale instance in Azure, and all of the breach data goes into there. And Stefan's here now, so he can chime in at any point which is relevant. So all of our data now goes in there. And there's a load of different reasons we did that, and I've talked about many of them before, particularly things like being able to do ad hoc queries, point-in-time restore, index in different ways, query. There's just such a much more enterprisey, for want of a better term, solution. So that now sits there. Now, if we talk about what actually happens when you make a query on Have I Been Pwned. So if you're on the front page and you search for test@example.com. So we've obviously got a web app that still exists. That is still the same. In fact, actually the same instance and the same code base, still the same ASP.NET MVC web application running on an Azure app service as I had on the 4th of December 2013. Yeah, shit, it's nearly 13 years. So that's the same one. It makes an asynchronous call to do the search, which is also the same model as initially. And then now is where everything starts to change. So now, as it has been for probably about 10 years now, everything is behind Cloudflare. So when you do that search for test@example.com, your request is immediately going to your nearest Cloudflare edge node. We then have a lot of edge logic. And just to sort of reiterate like what this edge concept is, Cloudflare is a reverse proxy. We still have all of these services that run in the West US Azure data center, which is in Seattle. That's where our database is. That's where all of the Azure code is. But when you make a request to anything on the Have I Been Pwned domain, you are connecting to your nearest Cloudflare edge node, and there are 300 plus of those around the world. So when I'm here on the Gold Coast and I make a request, it's going to Brisbane, which is about an hour drive that way, 70 kilometers, something like that. So it's a very close location. And then we get to run code on the edge in every single one of those data centers. So we deploy things like Cloudflare workers, which are able to look at these inbound requests and do things. We then have a lot of firewall rules. We have a lot of rate limiting rules. We have a lot of caching. There's a lot of stuff that happens on the edge. And the closer we can push everything possible to the edge, so the closer we can push it to the person actually requesting the resource, the better everything becomes. It comes faster for you guys. It becomes better for us because we're not having to serve everything from this origin service. We distribute it around the world. So you're doing this email address search, it goes into a worker there. And what the worker's doing is it's trying to pull the result from our cache in Cloudflare. So what we're doing is we're caching all of the results for all of the searches that you could possibly do and Have I Been Pwned on the edge, and they're replicating across 300 edge nodes, which is kind of cool because it means that there is literally a copy of the Have I Been Pwned database, SQL database, according to my big wall of screen up here, is now 1.26 terabytes. And about 1 terabyte of that is the email addresses that are in data breaches. So there's about 1 terabyte of that data sitting up there in Brisbane, and then sitting in Sydney, and sitting in Melbourne, and sitting somewhere close to you, wherever you are in the world. And our workers are querying that locally. Now, this is where it gets a little bit funky, and as it relates to some of the stuff that Stefan's talking about earlier, we are storing every email address in the origin service as both a plain text email address, test@example.com, and as a SHA-1 hash. Now, why are we doing a SHA-1 hash? And don't lose your minds about it being SHA-1 either. We don't use SHA-1 for things like integrity checks anymore. We've got hash collisions and all sorts of things. But what we do use it for is k-anonymity searches. So we do a lot of searches for our enterprise customers, and it's something we're launching publicly in a couple of weeks' time. We've already spoken about that. We do a lot of searches using k-anonymity, where instead of searching for test@example.com, we get that string, we hash it, it now becomes a 40-character SHA-1 hash. You take the first 6 characters, you say, have I been pwned? Here's the first 6 characters of a SHA-1 hash. We've got no idea which email address that is for, but what we do know is that if we go to the database, we've got usually several hundred different email addresses that, when hashed, begin with those first 6 characters. And then there are infinity email addresses left, which also begin with those first 6 characters, but have a different 34 characters at the end. So we come back and we go, hey, here are the several hundred results that have that hash prefix. Here is the suffix. Here are the 34 characters. And for each one of those, here are the data breaches they've been in. So we do that at the moment just for some of our enterprise customers. 1Password is one that we can publicly talk about. If you're using 1Password in the Watchtower app, you will see the ability via Have I Been Pwned to see which data breaches your email address has been in. Now, we're actually storing all of that on the edge. So as someone makes a query, so we flush all the cache out every time we load a data breach. So flush it out, all the edge nodes. Someone makes a query for test@example.com, create the SHA-1 hash, get the first 6 characters, go to the origin website because it's not cached, bring it back, store it in Cloudflare, return the result to the individual. Even if they're doing a plain text search, we're searching through that hash on the edge node because we're caching as much as we can on the edge. And what it means is, when I look at my little graphs up there on the wall of SQL database usage, we flush all the cache out, suddenly everything comes to the origin, our database usage massively spikes, people do loads and loads of queries, and we gradually cache more and more and more on the Cloudflare edge until we get to the point where it's at the moment, where our database is sitting at 2.75% utilization because all the queries are being served by Cloudflare. All the enterprise queries for a hash prefix are picking up from an edge node, and all of the public queries for a plain text email address are getting hashed in the worker and picking it up from cache. Now, Stefan, tell me if I get anything wrong here. Stefan says Cloudflare has support for PQC as well. What's PQC? Aaron says, oh, Troy, did you see Google is rolling out post-quantum TLS? It looks like it's going to be slow to use. Post-quantum has been on the to-do list for a long time. Oh, that's okay. Okay, now I got it. Yep, because I'm reading my comments in the wrong order. Post-quantum crypto, because we're worried about the quantum computers breaking all of the crypto as it stands today. All right, so that's where we get to. We've got this massive operational repository of hashed email addresses sitting in all these Cloudflare edge nodes that gradually builds up after each cache flush, and we're querying from there, which makes it really, really fast. Now, here's the next problem, and this is where we're going to read Stefan's recommendation together and figure out what he's talking about, because I had nowhere near enough coffee at 4:20 this morning when I was trying to read it. So we have an API, as you know. In fact, we've got many APIs. We've got APIs that are meant to be consumed only by the website, which is what happens when you go to the front page. If you open up the DevTools, you'll see a request to a unified search endpoint. We're using Cloudflare Turnstile, among other technologies, to try and make sure that that's only ever requested by visitors organically in the browser on the website. But here's Scott. We're just talking about you cheating and using AI for everything. So, and then explaining how we were doing it as well. So we've got APIs that are only meant to be consumed by organic users in the website. But we've also got APIs which are meant to be consumed by people with a key. And if you go to Have I Been Pwned and you go to the little API link, you'll see our documentation there. So when someone searches for an email address via the API, they have to pass an API key. And we use Azure API Management to provision those keys. So if you were to buy a Have I Been Pwned subscription, let's actually go through. Okay, everyone buy one together with me. No, don't worry. We'll just talk about it. Let's say we get a Pwned one $4.50 per month key, and you can make 10 requests per minute. The way we do both the rate limiting and the key provisioning is we use Azure API Management, which is their API management story. And API management as a product has got a lot more to it than what might initially catch the eye. So for example, you've got to be able to provision keys. Right, that's obvious. If you've got subscribers that want to use your API and they need keys, you've got to have a key provisioning mechanism. You need to have a key rotation mechanism. You need to have a key revocation mechanism. And all of that's just on keys so far. This is what API management does. You've then got to be able to handle potentially massive volumes of inbound requests and apply logic such as rate limits. So one of the things we can do with API management is apply a rate limit. We can apply, and we do this via a, what's the right nomenclature? Let's open up Azure API management in my other browser here. We do it via a policy. That's the word I'm looking for. So we create a policy that says you can make this many requests in this many seconds, which is great. And then what we do is when people come to Have I Been Pwned, they get the key, they go into the dashboard and Have I Been Pwned, or rather they get their subscription, then they go to the dashboard and say, give me a key. We're calling APIs, stay with me here, we're calling APIs on Azure to provision an API key, which is linked to a subscription, which is then tied to a rate limit. So you're actually getting a subscription Have I Been Pwned for your account. It's provisioning a key. It's then tied to a rate limit implemented by a policy so that you can't make more requests than that. That's what we do under the covers. And that bit is, I built that originally in 2019, before Stefan came on board. So this is some old code. We've had to upgrade a lot of old code as we've gone. As Stefan just says here, global rate limiting at scale is hard. So when you think about having thousands of subscribers making thousands of requests at all sorts of different rate limits and spread out all around the world, it's a hard problem. So here's our problem now. So we now have this challenge where we've got people, and I'm literally thinking through this as I explain it to try and make sense of what Stefan said earlier. We've got people making these API requests, passing their key, and as we said before, the API requests, all the requests start by going through Cloudflare. And what we want to do is we want to pull out the results from the Cloudflare edge because we've replicated this 1 terabyte worth of data around the world. We want to pull the result of the Cloudflare edge. But the API management is implemented at the origin. So Azure API management, there is one instance of that running in Seattle. So that's where we've got to do the check for the rate limit. But we want to serve the traffic from the edge. And what I want to be able to do, perfect world, and I think Stefan's figured out how to do this in a much more perfect way now, is I want to be able to make a request from here for an email address, have it go to the Brisbane data center, and that be all the traffic that's involved. I want to get the response immediately from the Brisbane data center. But how do I do that if the rate limit check is done in Seattle? So for example, does my traffic have to go from here to Brisbane, and then Brisbane's like, hey, we've got the data here, but we actually need to make sure that you're allowed to do the search and you haven't exceeded your rate limit. So what we've been doing, and this is where Stefan needs to jump in and tell me if I've got anything completely wrong. What we've been doing is you make the request from here, it hits your Cloudflare edge node. Within a worker, we then hit API management in Azure with a really, really lightweight request purely to check, are you within your rate limit? And I think we're even just doing a head request, aren't we, Stefan? And then we get the response from that request back with basically no body, so the smallest response possible. And then the result is pulled from the local cache. If it's not in the local cache, it will get that from the origin. So every single time you hit the API, say from here on the Gold Coast, we're going up to Brisbane, but then we're going to Seattle, and then we're coming back to Brisbane with the response, and then it's coming back down to me here. Now, I think that is right. Now, while Stefan tells me if it's wrong, I'll open up the idea he had last night, and we can all see if it actually makes any sense or not. Where was, oh, you sent this to me earlier today. Yes, because you've got, Stefan says, yep, correct. But we do start fetching the hash range before we do that though. But weren't we asynchronously like fetching the hash range potentially from the origin and doing the APIM check, because whether or not someone is authorized to access the data doesn't change the fact that if we don't have the data locally, then we want to, on the edge, we actually want to grab it from the origin and populate the cache. Right, so Stefan's come up with an idea last night, because one of the things that the way we got to this discussion is, as I mentioned earlier, and I spoke about at length in previous videos, we're going to add a plan level to Have I Been Pwned, hopefully in about 2 weeks and a day from now, I think is our schedule. We're going to add a plan level that makes k-anonymity searches available on like a pro tier. to the masses, not just to these enterprise subscribers. And then Steph and I were talking about, well, then you're going to end up with plain text email search, and you're going to end up with k-anonymity search. And originally they were going to have different rate limits, and I think we've decided that just made life too hard. We're going to have these two different products, potentially two different rate limits. How do we actually set up Azure API management? And how do we do it super efficiently? And Stefan's come up with this idea where he's got a policy fragment here in APIM. So let's have a read of what this does. I won't copy and paste this because there is some stuff in here I don't think we want to share, but we'll read through it. So a policy fragment is something that we can then apply to our products in Azure API management, where every single time a request comes in, we can apply this fragment. Now, before I go into that, here's one of the challenges. You have an API key, which is provisioned from Azure. That API key then maps through to an API management ID. That ID also has an email address next to it. That then maps through to an entity that's sitting on our database. Some APIs we need to call with a key and ultimately resolve back to an identity in our database. So for example, if you do a domain search, we need to know, when you do a domain search with the API key, we need to know that you're authorized to access that domain. So we have to take that key, go through to API management, resolve that to the actual identity of the person in our database, and then go to the database and say, okay, for, you had key, whatever, like crazy hexadecimal value it is, that is actually user number 573 in the database, and oh yes, they do have access to query troyhunt.com or whatever it is. So there is a reconciliation process between the key and the underlying identity, and APIM sort of sits in between as the mapping. So Steph has created a fragment here where we've got a cache key, an HIBP subscription cache key, and that's getting the ID of the current user. So what he's trying to do here is cache in API management this user. Now he's then, this is where, I wonder if we could use AI. If I copy this and I take out the key and I put it, let's do this. Why should I read this and understand it when I can just chuck into ChatGPT? Explain what this APIM fragment does. And then before I send that, we take out the key value here. I did accidentally drop a key into ChatGPT once, and it's like, you now need to go and change this key. And then the rest of that is okay. Yep. Explain what it does. Now, while the ChatGPT is looking that up, oh well, it's actually figured it out very quickly. The policy fragment does subscription-specific rate limiting with a 5-minute cache in front of a backing data source that returns metadata for the current subscription. Here's the flow. So, in fact, we can read the ChatGPT explanation of it as I look at the code as well on these two different screens. So, we're going to cache the user ID so that we know who it is. We've got a lookup here. Try and load the subscription metadata from cache. If found, the JSON metadata is placed into a variable here. If the cache is missed, call the external data point. So we've got this external data point, which is a function, an Azure function, serverless, runs on servers in Azure, where we can pass the subscription ID and it can come back and it can give us attributes about the user. So, Stefan, I think I'm getting this right. So we've got this endpoint on Have I Been Pwned. It's an authenticated endpoint, can't be called publicly, can only be called by Azure APIM, passing a particular key to it. It says, hey, here's the subscription ID. We know the subscription ID because the API key is passed in. APIM resolves it to an ID. We can then go to Have I Been Pwned, say, get me this user. And it can come back and it can give us all of the information that we have in Have I Been Pwned about this user. That then gets cached in APIM. Now, I can just paraphrase what Stefan said to me in the message earlier on. But what we can do is we can immediately return the result. I think that check, because it's cached and we've got a 5-minute cache here, it's every 5 minutes we're doing the we're doing the cache refresh. So if anything changes to the subscription level, I was wondering, Stefan, if someone upgrades their subscription, might it take up to 5 minutes to actually see their new key? No, because we would actually change that in APIM straight away. Except, yeah, okay. No, I think we might have a gap there. Find out. We would then return that information. What did chat say here? Fail fast if need be. If the source call succeeds, stored the JSON in the variable. So the JSON in the variable, which is sitting there in the fragment, includes all of the information that we know about the customer. Apply a per subscription rate limit. So I think the bottom line that we get to here is that we can, in the background, check if the rate limit has been exceeded, but people are getting responses immediately from... Stefan, I'm screwing this up. Paraphrase it. Actually, you already have, because you put it in Slack this morning. This policy fetches subscription info from functions based on subscriber ID, caches it for 5 minutes, then does rate limiting according to the result from the subscription info. We can then also return things in the headers like can access KAnon, etc. That means the workers can use this for both rate limiting as well as to do checks to see which flags users have. It's just a matter of exposing it via response headers. Okay. So when the APIM check returns 429, we set the expiring KV value in the workers indicating rate limit in the KV. So basically, we can just get much faster responses from the edge without the edge having to wait on a return to the origin service. Is that a good summary? Yeah, problems local there. Probably tweak cache timers to minimize impact. Yeah. Yeah. So this, I mean, with taking a step back from the weeds for a second, it kind of gives you an insight as to how something that looks like it's a really, really, really simple service has become, I don't want to say it's not unnecessarily complex, but increasingly complex in terms of trying to achieve all the objectives at once, to make it fast, to keep it private, to limit the ability to abuse, and to make it financially sustainable such that we're not paying gazillions of dollars for egress bandwidth or databases or things like that. And this has been the constant challenge the whole way through. Like, how do we achieve all those things at once? Like, how do we keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger without having to load more people on top? More people and more costs. And I think this is one of the things, I'm just looking at Scott's messages here, he's had the similar sort of challenges with Report Your Right. We have very similar problems with Report Your Right. Single source of truth for if you want to have event quota remaining but need to drop it on the CF Edge. If you don't, Steph and I have said many times before, Cloudflare's launched a bunch of new stuff. They're always launching new stuff, but they've recently launched a bunch of stuff which is designed to help AI crawlers sort of index your content. And people, of course, have lost their minds over that because they don't understand it. However, one of the things that they have not launched, which Steph and I have pushed them on many, many, many times, and if you're at Cloudflare, listen to this, is if they had an APIM story, if they had key provisioning and revocation and rotation, and they could run it at the edge, and they could do rate limits at the edge, and they could do it such that it synchronizes across all of their edge nodes, that would be an absolute killer feature for use cases like this, because we are literally here hacking around between Microsoft service, which does that, albeit centrally in one location in the world, and trying to almost like delegate that functionality back into the Cloudflare edge node so that we can do that in 300 places around the world. If we could just do that on the edge, Scott says you could do that with KV quite trivially. No, we can't. Stefan can explain why, unless you're replying to something else. Look at Stefan's messages here. He says, so workers can basically assume users is cool after rate limit check and return data immediately without waiting for the rate limit check. It still does the check asynchronously. And this is the thing, like it's not so much necessarily about removing requests and things like that. It's about removing dependencies which slow things down. If we can get responses to people faster, particularly as we start doing k-anonymity for the masses, because k-anonymity by definition returns way, way, way more data. Like, not everyone who has access to k-anonymity with these pro plans is just going to turn it on. You do a search for an email address, test@example.com, and you get back just the data for test@example.com. you do a k-anonymity search for the first 6 characters of the SHA-1 hash of testedexample.com, and you get back hundreds of hash suffixes, and for every one of those, a collection of the breaches that they've been in. And that's a massive amount of additional data that comes back. So if we can return that faster and take out some of the latency problems with having to do a check all the way back to the origin, and we can still Brotli compress or whatever our most efficient compression mechanism is now over HTTP, that's actually really, really good. But not everyone's going to use that, because it's still going to be faster to do the individual search. It's just the privacy thing. Stebbit says, but once the rate limit returns to 429, the worker will set an expiring KV value, which is what the sorker, what the worker checks before anything else. And if set returns 429. So we sort of then delegate the 429 response from APIM at the origin back to the CF worker at the edge. But it means immediate responses with non-blocking rate limit checks. I think that's a good summary, isn't it? Immediate responses with non-blocking rate limit checks. Yeah. What we're going to trade off there is we're trading off a potential window where someone can exceed the rate limit. And different use cases, you can trade off different things. In our use case, when we're simply saying someone has bought a subscription, and let's say they're allowed to make 10 requests per minute, and they might have a period of a little window there where they actually get to make more than what they should have. They might made 12 requests per minute or something like that. And then they get binned for some amount of time. We can trade that off because it's not a privacy problem. It's not a security problem. It's not really a cost problem. It's really just someone has exceeded some limits of their plan, but we've then reeled that back in. And if we can do that in a way that actually gets people responses way, way, way faster and makes the service much more efficient, like that's a good trade-off. And these are the constant discussions that Steph and I have, I feel like, on a daily basis. Steph says the window is measured in milliseconds, but it means the window for us to resume is also delayed a tiny bit. Yeah, we're talking about because, and I think you're saying in milliseconds because we might return a response straight away, but then the async response we return a response straight away from the edge, but then the async response, or request, which is going to APIM, the async response going to APIM to check the rate limit, might come back and say rate limit exceeded, in which case it updates the cache, and then the next request is going to say, well, you're hitting 429. So it's like we gave you a free one, which again, we can do. We can make that compromise. I've just read back there. You said YouTube was lagging. I assume it's okay now. Everything looks okay on my end. Let me have a look at some of the other comments here because I've been ranting on about this for a while. VXDB Real, does living in Australia create any business difficulties for customers in the US or Europe, even due to the time zone? It's not too bad for us. The US is actually really good for us. I mean, Pacific time at the moment is 2:13 in the afternoon. I've been up for 3 hours. So I've been up since their morning. Eastern Standard Time is 5 something in the afternoon. So there's always business hours crossover. So what we find is first thing in my morning is good for the US. Last thing in my day is good for Europe. So for Stefan at the moment and on UTC, it is 9:13 p.m. So what I find, certainly for Stefan and I, he's a bit of a night owl. I'm a bit of a morning person. So we get many hours of crossover in the morning, and then he comes online as I'm having my dinner at the other end of the day, and we get crossover at the end of the day. So we inadvertently, by virtue of him being in Iceland, have a pretty much follow the sun, people awake kind of model. But to be honest, like the time zone thing doesn't matter too much in that I don't have a lot of meetings. There's something I was talking to Scott about the other day. Try and avoid meeting with people. That's a time suck. I don't know if we totally agreed on that, but I try and avoid having online meetings you have to schedule. And then obviously emails sometimes are delayed a bit, but you know, look, you sleep for 8 hours. For Scott and Steph and I, we're all in very, I guess, flexible, casual hour stuff here. You know, sometimes you're doing emails just before bed and sometimes you're doing it first thing in the morning. So It works. Stephen has to go away for a bit, away from keyboard for a bit. Your explanation was spot on. Yeah, thank you, mate. Okay, good. I understand. And that's just good because by explaining it to you, I have been able to explain it to myself as well. Yeah, so back to the point of does it create problems in Australia? Look, not really. And I travel so much as well that no matter where I am in the world, it really doesn't, there's no time zone that's too bad. I know the discussion I was having with Scott was when we were in Dubai a couple of months ago, and he was saying that if they were to move to Dubai, I'm not sure how those plans are going at the moment, mate, but if he was, then there's not the same crossover window with the US in particular, which of course is where a lot of the people are, as what he has when he's in the UK. All right, let's look at the other comments here. Jean-Claude Pascal Kunster. That's a great name. Best wishes from Germany. It's my favourite hero from Australia. I love Germany. Germany's awesome. We were in Munich only a little while ago. Might be back in Germany later this year. We'll see, actually. VXW, awake at 4 a.m. Jesus, I went to bed at 4 a.m. last night. So, look, my normal schedule is to wake at 5 a.m. There are many reasons for this. One of the reasons is that we do not have daylight saving in this state. If you go 30 kilometres that way, they do have daylight saving, and my 5 a.m. is their 6 a.m., and then suddenly it's a little bit more normal. 4 a.m., this morning was my last 4 a.m. get up for a while. Our son does rowing, and because rowing, he has to get to school we leave here at 4:40 in the morning. So 4 a.m. is enough time to get up, have coffee, do my messages, take him to rowing. Yeah, it is a bit, 4 a.m. is a bit brutal. I'm not a fan of that. 5 a.m. I love. 5 a.m. is great. At least it's sort of getting light by then as well. Let's hear in the comments. Marek says, I think a delay in application of plan upgrade would be acceptable to most customers, especially if delay is disclosed at point of sale. Yeah, no, totally. I don't think I'm not sure that that's actually going to matter. Because to Stefan's point, think about it like this. And all of this comes down to milliseconds, because I understand it better now that he explained it. So I'm thinking it through as I talk about it. You're making a request from the Gold Coast here. You go to the Cloudflare Edge node in Brisbane, and there's two things that have to happen. One is we have to get the data. The other is we have to check the rate limit. And at the moment, checking the rate limit blocks returning the data to the client. And what Stefan's saying is, let's just return the data immediately, and then asynchronously, we'll check the rate limit, come back, and then we'll set a variable on the edge if the rate limit has been exceeded, such that the next request gets the rate limit. Now, so long as you've got that other asynchronous request, which is going back to the origin, checking the rate limit, if the rate limit has changed, it's changing at the origin. So if you change from 10 RPM to 50 RPM, then at worst, your check is going to be double-digit milliseconds, depending on where your edge node is, maybe 100 milliseconds delay. 100 milliseconds delay you can live with. Now, Stefan has just added something. What did he add something there? Oh, no, he sent it over here on Slack. That's why. Let me read this and see if I can repeat it. Oh, yeah, that doesn't matter. Yeah, okay. No, that's fine. Yeah, so, but you're right. There could be a small delay. I think so long as you set expectations for people, you're fine. Where it gets a little bit tricky is if something behaves in a way that they don't expect. But I don't think that's going to be a problem anyway. All right. What else can I talk about here? VXW, waking up at 10 a.m. is even better. Here's the number one thing. This is in my experience. Getting enough sleep is the number one thing now. If that means you go to bed at 2 a.m. and you wake up at 10 a.m., it's still 8 hours, like it's all good. Waking up at 4 a.m. is fine if we're in bed asleep by 9 p.m., which we are. And that's fine. That's 7 hours, maybe 7 and a bit hours. Enough sleep is the key. Other architectural things. How long have I got? I've got about another 10 minutes. If there's something you want to know about how we do that, drop it in the comments and I'll explain it. Let's talk a little bit about some of the things we've got coming up around domain verification, because one of the things that is tricky is we've got nearly 400,000 domains being monitored in Have I Been Pwned. More than half the Fortune 500 monitors at least one domain. And we know that because we've got lists of Fortune 500 domains, then we map them back, and then we get the distinct list of the companies, which is cool. So it's a huge amount of data that's in there, and it's really, really useful information for organizations to know when their people are in data breaches. But we want to make sure that someone can't query the domain of another company, not without their explicit consent. And in fact, our terms and conditions have prohibited that before. Anyway, we're going to revise that with one of our plan levels in a couple of weeks. But at the moment, when you want to verify control of a domain, let's say an organization comes on and they've got 20 domains. And at the moment, for each one, you've got to go to the web browser, manually enter the domain. If you want to do something like DNS validation, which is what a lot of organizations do, you enter the domain, it comes back, so here's a token. Now you need to copy this token. You need to go into the web interface of whoever your DNS provider is, set that TXT record, wait for the DNS to propagate, and go back to Have I Been Pwned and verify. One of the endpoints that we have built, and in fact it's pretty much live, just undocumented, is for subscribers on this new Pro tier that we're going to push out. Pro plan level, we call it. Get my nomenclature right. There is an API where you can call this API and Have I Been Pwned with your Azure API management key. Call the API and say, I would like to verify this domain via DNS. So you send the domain, Have I Been Pwned comes back and says, here's the token. You can then call the API of your DNS provider of choice. So for example, Cloudflare. If you're using Cloudflare for DNS, they have APIs that allow you to set a TXT record on your domain. So you then call that API, you drop the TXT record on there, and then when that's done, there's another API on Have I Been Pwned, which you can call to cause Have I Been Pwned to check DNS to make sure the record's there. And then maybe DNS takes a while, so you can put in sleeps and delays and then just keep calling this API over and over again until it's verified, which is cool. So it's now a process where if you've got particularly large numbers of domains, you can script the whole thing. That's a good AI case. You can script the whole thing with AI and drop in as many domains as you want, so long as you can control the DNS. Now, particularly things like MSPs, and again, our terms and conditions, which everybody reads very carefully when they sign up to anything, have not allowed organizations to go and take out subscriptions for the benefit of a third party or some sort of legal jargon to that effect. When we have this Pro tier in a couple of weeks' time, that disappears for that tier. So we want the likes of MSPs to be able to use this service. We had the law firm sent us all the revised terms and conditions yesterday, which I got to read this morning, it is the least fun thing of everything, reading terms and conditions. However, that will allow an MSP, for example, who has a bunch of product offerings that they provide with their customers, that will allow them to register the domains of their customers. If they have control of DNS, easy job. We've spoken about how to do that. If they don't have control of DNS, we built another API where if you're on this Pro tier, you can just send the domain to the API and you can tell it which of those 5 allowable email address aliases we already have on the web application, the stuff like webmaster, admin, security, whatever, which one you want to use. That will send an email through to that address, and then your customer can click the link on the email address, opens up a Have I Been Pwned website. Do you want to give such and such access to be able to monitor your domain? And you click yes, and it's job done. So it's a little bit more manual, but at least the likes of an MSP, for example, can chuck in however many domains into this API, enumerate through them, send off all the emails, and they're good to go. So that is coming up in a couple of weeks. Now, Stefan, forgot to mention, new APIM policy also gives us easily configurable global rate limit instead of magic strings or constants in APIM. Okay, they're also good. I think once we've done all this, also, Stefan, you were meant to be going away from keyboard. Anyway, once we've done all of this, I think it would be really good to write that up in a blog post too, because I find that when we write stuff, and we put it out there, not only is it useful for other people, which is good, but we often have people pop up and go, have you thought about this other thing? Or in the case of what I was just talking about with Cloudflare, where I'd really, really, really want to see them have an API management story, someone there is going to read this and go, yeah, we really should have an API management story. VXW Real says, have you had any crazy or funny legal stories? People getting mad, their data is on Have I Been Pwned or something. So we have never had, touch wood, any legal issues of any significance. We get mad, crazy people all the time over really dumb shit. And I'll give you some examples, but the path that we have chosen to take, because we are very small, it is Charlotte and Stefan and I, and it's the three of us. And we do this out of, I mean, it is a business now, but out of passion as well. And it's something that we want to be able to keep running. So we're very, very conscious of avoiding conflict. So most of the time when someone's upset, we try and find the path of least resistance to resolve it. So usually, the things that people get upset about is like, why do you have my data? Where did my data come from? And now the AI just replies to the ticket automatically, which is really useful. And then you have to explain what data breaches are. And then they go, you permanently delete my data. And I say, yep, that's fine. We've got all of these, opt-out options and things here. The ones that, to be honest, the ones I find the most obnoxious is people pop up and go, and it's usually someone in Europe and they're citing GDPR. It's like, I'm in Europe and GDPR under this act, and they have all the bullet points and all the quote numbers or the section numbers or things, and it reads like a really formal legal letter. And this was even before we started to see so much AI generated stuff. And it sounds angry and nasty. And all they're really saying is, can you please delete my data? So again, we've got AI responses to that. We've never had any threats of significance. I've had lots of discussions with lawyers, mostly because they end up getting involved trying to figure out what the impact to an organization is. Never really on behalf of individuals. One of the things I get a lot of contact from lawyers on, which I haven't had for a little while, is class action lawyers who want to advertise on Have I Been Pwned? Because they're like, we could get so many more plaintiffs on this class action if you could have a banner for like Jonathan's law firm. Has your email address been exposed in a data breach? Want retribution now? Join this class action. We get a lot of those. I don't like those. I tend to ignore them. But no, nothing bad, really. Just mad about dumb shit. We had someone recently, speaking of dumb shit, we had someone who was like, I'm from such and such an organization. My credit card has been fraudulently used to purchase your subscriptions. And we're looking at it going, occasionally we have credit card fraud. And Stripe's normally very, very good at picking that up too. Like our credit card fraud rate is 1 or 2 a month. Like it's basically nothing. So occasionally though, there'll be a credit card where someone has stolen this card data from somewhere or other and used it. And what will happen is the credit card will be like, it belongs to John Smith and the credit card's based in the US. And then there's an account, which is a Proton Mail email address, and they've taken out a subscription from Bangladesh. And for some reason, it slipped through Stripe's fraud controls. But this one the other day was someone with an email address at this guy's company had taken out a subscription a couple of years ago using his credit card. And this guy was starting to rant and rave a little bit about this being a fraudulent charge. And we're going, hang on, mate, like, what are the chances that your card got defrauded, or rather your card data got stolen, it's in some data dump somewhere, and it just happened to have been used by someone at your company? Do you think that happened, or do you think someone else at your company has your card? And we pulled enough data to know that this person had taken out a subscription, they provisioned a key. We don't store enough data to know if they'd been using it over this period of time. But this guy was really quite irate about this. And this was like for $4.50 a month as well. It was like a stupidly small amount of money. So eventually we just canceled his subscription for him and like, look, this is not fraud. This is somebody has your card. You need to go check your wallet or something to that effect. And it's just dumb shit like that. You said, I know Ben got a few of the Cynthian stuff. So this was poor Ben, who sent us all this Synthient data last year. So, well, Synthient data. He runs a service called Synthient. He's a young guy. He's in college. He's making a name for himself, which is great. Found a bunch of steal-log stuff. Sent us a huge volume of data. We put like a couple of billion email addresses into Have I Been Pwned, and we very carefully explained it was like Synthient credential stuffing data or steal-log data. Discovered by Synthient. He's not the party responsible for it. And he had so many people contact him and get pissed that he had their data. And he's like, whoa, like I'm literally just finding stuff that's been stolen and published on the internet and then trying to let you know about it. So yeah, we know that that was a bit annoying for him. And we had, we sent hundreds of thousands of emails to our subscribers too. And there was a point there where he was like, can you stop letting your subscribers know that their data has been breached? And that doesn't really solve the problem. I think it actually worked out well for him. I think it did. Aaron says, how did that young pad get on? Benefits, was it? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Yeah, Scott has the shield. I think Scott has the shield because he's an admin on my YouTube because we've done live streams together. Yeah. And he has had the ability to bin people. I haven't had to bin anyone for a very long time, actually. So, yeah, you can keep the shield. It looks good. All right, folks, I need to wrap it up there because I need to get on with my day. And we'll see what happens next week. I don't know. It's all kind of weird at the moment. If you'd also, just incidentally, and Scott, I want you to show me sometime too, because Stefan said you're using a lot of AI. I'm really, really curious, like how are people actually using it in agent mode to build stuff? And I need to make more time to actually sit there and look at videos and so on. But I'm just curious if anyone has any really good resources, particularly things that are related to Visual Studio and Copilot, about how they're using AI to build meaningful stuff. I'm just really interested to see the approaches people take, because it's certainly helping us a lot, and I'm sure that we're only scratching the surface. All right, on that note, folks, I'm going to wrap it up. Catch you next week.